That was the moment the whole picture finally came together for me. Not in some neat, cinematic way, it came together like a slap, the kind you don't see coming because it's from someone who's been smiling at you for 30 years. I'm telling you this because I know I'm not the only one. I know there are people right now sitting on a couch in their parents' living room, eating Thanksgiving leftovers off a paper plate while their brother gets the good china, who feels something rotting quietly in their chest and can't put a word to it. I couldn't either. Not for a long time. My name is Beckett. I'm 34. I grew up in a town called Ridgewell, just outside Charlotte, the kind of suburb where every other dad drove a Chevy Tahoe and every mom ran a Facebook group about lawn care. My family looked, from the outside, like one of those Christmas card families. My older sister married a real estate guy with a jaw like a granite countertop. My younger brother was the kicker for our high school state championship team, the one whose photo still hangs in the hardware store downtown. And then there was me, the middle one, the quiet one, the one nobody ever knew what to say about, so they just said, Beckett, oh, he's around. That's how I was described at my own cousin's wedding once. I overheard it. My aunt was talking to one of the bridesmaids, and she said, the two boys are great kids. Well, Tyler is. Beckett's around. Then she laughed. Like that was a kind enough thing to say. I was 26. I had already started building something nobody in my family bothered to ask about. But to her, I was just around. I want to be honest with you. I didn't grow up hating any of them. I loved my parents. I loved my sister Marlena. I loved my brother Tyler. The way you love people who give you scraps when they think they're giving you a feast. You convince yourself the scraps are enough because the alternative is admitting your family doesn't see you. And that's a kind of grief most people will do anything to avoid. My mom always called Tyler her miracle. He came late after the doctors told her she couldn't have any more kids. I came 2 years before Tyler, which I guess made me the warm-up. Marlena came first, and from the second she could talk, she could charm the paint off a wall. My dad called her his girl. Tyler was my miracle. And me? My dad called me Champ until I was about 10, and then he just stopped calling me anything in particular. I'd come into the kitchen and he'd say, hey, you, and reach for the coffee. I want to tell you about the night this story really starts, but I have to back up first, because the night I'm going to tell you about, the one with the hotel and my mother and the look on my sister's face, that night didn't just happen out of nowhere. That night had been building for 34 years. It just took me a while to see the foundation. When I was 16, I told my parents I wanted to study hotel management. We were at the dinner table. My dad laughed. He didn't even put his fork down. He just laughed and said, what, you want to be a bellhop? My mom told me to be realistic, Marlena said. Beckett, that's not a job for someone like you. I asked her what she meant by someone like me, and she said, you know, quiet, not really a people person. Tyler was 12. He looked up from his mashed potatoes and said, Dad, can you sign my permission slip for the away game? And the conversation moved on. My future career was a joke that got swallowed by a permission slip. I worked at Hampton Inn the summer after I graduated high school. Front desk, night shift. I made $9 an hour and I loved every minute of it. I loved the quiet hum of the lobby at 2 a.m. I loved the businessman who came in at 3 in the morning after a delayed flight and just needed someone to be kind to him. I loved figuring out how to fix a printer at 4 a.m. with nothing but a paperclip and a YouTube tutorial. My parents thought I was wasting my life. My mom told her friends I was still figuring things out. I was 19 and already certain I'd figured it out. I just didn't bother to convince her. I put myself through community college, then transferred to a state school for hospitality management. I graduated. I took a job in Atlanta managing a small boutique hotel. I was 24. The owner was a man named Mr. Halpert, and he was the first adult in my life who looked at me and seemed to actually see something. He told me, kid, you've got a feel for this. You can teach the rest, but you can't teach the feel. I almost cried in his office. I went home and didn't tell anyone because I knew if I told my mom, she'd say, well, that's nice. Did you hear Tyler got promoted at the dealership? By 28, I'd opened my own little place, a 12-room property in a converted Victorian outside Asheville. It was nothing. It was everything. I'd saved every spare dime for 4 years, taken out a loan against future receivables, and I worked it myself for the first 18 months. Made the beds, cleaned the bathrooms, cooked the breakfast. By 31, I had 3 properties. By 33, I had 11, including the one I want to tell you about. It's called the Brennick. It sits on 6 acres just north of Asheville, 84 rooms, a restaurant that has, last I checked, a 7-month wait list for Saturday nights, a spa, a wine cellar with a sommelier who used to work in Napa. The building itself was an old industrialist estate from 1907 that I bought at auction and spent 2 years restoring. I bought it with my own money, my own credit, my own sweat. Nobody in my family has ever been there, not because I didn't invite them, because they never asked, and after a while I stopped offering. My mother has been to Asheville. She's been there twice, both times for Marlena's friends' weddings. Neither time did she ask if I had a place to suggest she stay. Neither time did she call to say she was in town. The second time, I only found out because I saw her tagged in a Facebook photo at a vineyard 40 minutes from my front door. I sat with that for a while. Then I made myself a drink and went back to work. I never told them what I do, not really. I told them I work in hospitality. When my mom asked once, in passing, I said I managed a hotel. She nodded and said, "That's nice, sweetheart. Are you ever going to settle down?" That was the end of the conversation. They thought I was a hotel clerk in my 30s. They thought I rented a 1-bedroom and ate ramen. They never asked, so I never told. And I'll be honest, by then there was a part of me that wanted to see how long they'd go without asking. The answer turned out to be forever, if I'd let them. Okay, so now you know who I am. Let me tell you about the night. It was my father's 70th birthday. My mom called me a month before. It was the longest conversation we'd had in 2 years. She said, "Beckett, your father is turning 70. We want to do something special. Marlena and Grayson are paying for a venue. We're going to be in Asheville of all places. Isn't that funny?" She didn't know it was funny because of me. She thought it was funny because Marlena had decided to discover Asheville. She told me they'd booked the Brennick. She didn't say the name. She said, "Some fancy hotel up in the mountains. Grayson knows somebody who knows somebody." I remember I had to set my coffee down. I asked her to repeat it. She said, "I don't remember what it's called. Something old sounding. Grayson's handling all of it." I should have said something then. Should have. I didn't. I sat there at my desk and let her keep talking. And somewhere in my chest, something cold and patient settled in. She told me Tyler would fly in from Phoenix. Marlena and Grayson would drive up from Charlotte. They'd booked the private dining room for Saturday night. She said, "You should come. It would mean a lot to your father." And I said, "I'll be there, Mom." She said, "I'll be there, Wong." She said, "Wonderful. Wear something nice, please. Grayson's parents are coming and they're particular." The day of the dinner, I drove to the Brennick like any other day. I parked in my usual spot. I walked in through the staff entrance because I always do, because my regional director, a woman named Imani, who's been with me since the Asheville location, was just a hole in the ground, likes to do our walkthrough at 4 sharp before any evening event. We did the walkthrough. We checked the private dining room. The flowers, which Marlena had selected, were peonies in November, which meant they'd been flown in from somewhere expensive. There was a custom menu card with my father's name printed in gold. I picked one up. I read it. I set it back down. Imani asked me, "You sure you want to do this?" I told her the week before who was coming. I told her my father didn't know I owned the place. I told her my mother didn't either. I told her my sister had booked it under her own name and demanded a VIP welcome. Imani had stared at me for a long moment, and then she said, "Beckett, they don't know?" And I said, "No." And she said, "How is that possible?" And I said, "Because they never asked." So that afternoon in the private dining room, she looked at me and asked again, "You sure?" And I said, "Yeah, let's just see how the night goes." I told her I wanted to be treated like any other guest until I said otherwise. No special acknowledgments, no staff smiling at me funny, nobody calling me sir, nobody calling me Mr. Beckett, just a guy in a suit. That was the deal. I left through the staff entrance and drove home and changed into a dark gray suit. Nothing flashy. I picked it up from a tailor in Charleston a year ago, and I've worn it maybe 4 times. I tied my own tie. I stood in the mirror and I looked at myself and I thought, this is the man my family thinks is a hotel clerk. Okay. I drove back to the Brennick at 6:45. I walked in through the main entrance for the first time in I don't know how long. The doorman, a young guy named Dimitri, held the door open for me. Dimitri has worked for me for 2 years. He's putting himself through nursing school. His face didn't even flicker. He just said, "Good evening, sir," and held the door, and I walked into my own lobby like a stranger. My sister was standing in the lobby. She saw me before I saw her. I heard her voice before I saw her face. She said, "Oh my God, Beckett, what are you wearing?" I turned around. Marlena was in a navy dress that looked like it cost more than most people's rent. Her husband, Greason, was behind her on his phone. My mother was a few feet away, fussing with her earring. My father was sitting on one of the leather couches in the lobby looking tired. Tyler was at the bar, already on a drink. Marlena walked up to me and looked me over like I was a stain on a tablecloth. She said, "Is that the suit you're wearing?" "Beckett, we told you. Grayson's parents are coming." I said, "Hi, Marlena. Happy birthday week to Dad." She didn't even hear me. She kept going. I can't with you sometimes. "Did you even iron it, Mom? Look at his suit." My mother turned. She made a face. Not even a cruel face. Worse than that. A patient, disappointed face. The one I'd been seeing my whole life. She said, "Oh, Beckett, sweetheart, we talked about this." I said, "It's a nice suit, Mom." Grayson looked up from his phone. He said, "Bro, did you, get that at a thrift store?" Then he laughed, but only with his mouth. His eyes were already back on his screen. "I want you to understand something. The suit cost $4,200. It was hand-stitched. The lining alone was finer than anything Grayson had ever owned. But my family didn't know how to see expensive things on someone they decided was poor. So all they saw was a gray suit on Beckett. The one who was around. My mother put her hand on my arm. Soft. The way she used to do when I was 8 and she was about to tell me Tyler needed the better room because of the light. She said, "Honey, listen. Tonight is very important. Grayson's parents own 3 car dealerships. They're very particular. I just need you to not embarrass us, okay? Just sit quietly. Smile. Don't bring up your job." She said, "Your job," like the word itself was infected. I said, "Mom." She squeezed my arm. "I know you're sensitive about it. I'm not trying to be mean, sweetheart. I'm trying to help you." Marlena added, "And don't order the wine. Grayson's father is going to pick the wine. You wouldn't know." Behind them, I could see one of my sommeliers, a man named Robard, standing near the entrance to the private dining room. Robard had picked our entire cellar. Robard had once been flown to France by a French wine syndicate. Robard, at that very moment, was looking at the floor very intently because he could hear every word. I just nodded. I said, "Got it. Won't order the wine." Grayson's parents arrived a few minutes later. His mother was a woman in pearls who looked at me like I was a coat rack. His father was a barrel-chested man with a politician's handshake. He took one look at my suit and his face did this thing. This little micro flinch. And then he turned to my dad and said, "Frank, big night." Big night. My father stood up. He's 70 now. He looks it. He clapped Grayson's father on the shoulder and said, "Thanks for coming all this way." Then he turned to me. He said, "Beckett, glad you could make it." And he held out his hand for a handshake, not a hug, a handshake, from his own son, on his own birthday. After I drove, in his mind, 3 hours from wherever he thought I lived, I shook his hand. I said, "Happy birthday, Dad." He said, "Thank you, son." And then he turned away to talk to Grayson's father about boats. We started walking toward the private dining room. Marlena was leading the way like she'd built the place herself. She turned to my mother and said, loud enough for me to hear, "I just hope he doesn't order the most expensive thing on the menu like last time and make us split the check." My mother said, "Oh, I already told Grayson. We'll cover Beckett's portion. Don't worry." I stopped walking. I didn't mean to. My feet just stopped. My mother turned back. "What is it, honey?" I said. "You're going to cover my portion." She gave me the patient face again. She lowered her voice. She said, "Beckett, this place is expensive. We don't expect you to pay. We know you can't. It's fine, sweetheart. Don't make a thing of it." Marlena turned around too. She said, "Mom told us not to make you feel bad, so just order normally, okay? Get the chicken or something." Grayson, still on his phone, mumbled, "Place is like 300 a head, easy." I looked at my sister. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father, who was now 10 feet away laughing at something Grayson's father had said. I looked at Tyler at the bar, where he hadn't even bothered to come over to greet me. I said, "Okay." That's all I said. "Okay." and I walked into the private dining room with them. We sat down. The room was beautiful. I knew it was beautiful because I'd designed it. The chandelier was a piece I'd found at an estate sale in Savannah. The chairs were upholstered in a fabric I'd flown in from Portugal. The table was a single live-edge walnut slab from a mill in Tennessee. Grayson's mother sat down and ran her hand along the wood and said, "Oh my, this is really something." Marlena beamed like she'd grown the tree herself. The first course came out. It was a beet salad with goat cheese and walnuts. The chef, a man named Oluwaseun, had developed the recipe with me at midnight in the test kitchen 6 months ago. I remembered the night. We'd argued about the walnuts. He'd won. He was right. Grayson's father took a bite. He nodded. He said, "Frank, you picked a heck of a place." My father said, "Well, Grayson found it." Grayson smiled. He said, "I know a guy." He didn't know a guy. He'd called the general line and asked for a private room and been put on a wait list and gotten in only because somebody canceled. But I let him have it. My mother turned to Grayson's mother and said, "We're so lucky to have Grayson in the family. He really takes care of us." Marlena reached over and squeezed Grayson's hand. Grayson smiled. Tyler raised his glass. My father raised his. They all clinked. Nobody clinked with me. Nobody even looked at me. I had a piece of beet on my fork. I set it down. I picked up my water glass. I took a sip. I set it back down. That's the moment I want you to remember. That's the moment something inside me, something that had been bending for 34 years, finally snapped clean in half. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Like a wire under tension that finally goes. I want to tell you what I felt. I felt nothing. I felt completely, almost peacefully empty. I felt the way you feel when you've been arguing with someone in your head for years and you finally realize they were never going to hear you, so you might as well stop talking. I excused myself from the table. I said I had to make a call. My mother said, "Beckett, be quick, the next course is coming." I said, "Of course." I walked out into the hallway. I walked past Robard, who was standing by the door pretending to inspect a wine list. He gave me a small nod. I gave him one back. I went to the office I keep on the second floor, the one nobody in my family knows exists. I sat down behind the desk. I picked up the phone. I called Imani. I said, "Imani, it's time." She said, "Are you sure, Beckett?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Okay, give me 5 minutes." I sat at the desk for 5 minutes. I looked at the photo on the wall. It was me and Mr. Halberd, the man who first told me I had a feel for this. He died 2 years ago. I'd flown to Atlanta for the funeral. His daughter, a woman named Yolanda, had hugged me at the reception and said, "He talked about you all the time. He said you were the son he should have had." I'd had to leave the room. I sat there and I thought about him. I thought about how, at 16, I'd told my parents I wanted to study hotels, and my father had laughed without putting his fork down. I thought about a man I barely knew who had believed in me more than the man who raised me. I thought about my whole life, all of it, every dismissed thing, every "oh, Beckett's around," every Christmas dinner where Tyler told the same story for the 5th year in a row and my mother laughed like she'd never heard it before, while I sat there with something I'd built that nobody had ever asked about. I went back downstairs. I walked back into the private dining room. Everyone was eating the second course. My mother looked up and said, "Everything okay, honey?" I said, "Yes, Mom, everything's fine." I sat down. A minute later, Imani walked in. She was holding a folder. She was wearing the dark blazer she wears for senior staff functions. She walked up to the table and she said in her clear, calm regional director voice, "Mr. Beckett, I apologize for the interruption. The board call has been moved up. They're holding for you in the executive suite." The whole table went still. Marlena was the first one to speak. She let out a little laugh. She said, "I'm sorry." "What?" Imani didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on me. She said, "Mr. Arwhite, Beckett, also, the foil vendor, has questions about the spring contracts, and Chef Oluwaseun would like you to approve the holiday tasting menu tonight if possible. He's in the kitchen." My mother said, "Beckett, what is she talking about?" I said, "Imani, thank you. Tell the board I'll be 5 minutes." Imani nodded. She said, "Yes, sir." She walked out. "Yes, sir." The phrase landed in the room like a piece of furniture that didn't belong. My father looked at me. He said, Beckett, what was that? I picked up my water glass. I took a sip. I set it down. I said, Dad, there's something I should have told you a long time ago. I own this hotel. The silence. I want to tell you about the silence. It was the kind of silence that has weight. The kind that has its own gravity. Grayson's mother put her fork down. Grayson's father, who'd been mid-pour, set the wine bottle on the table. Marlena let out a laugh. A sharp one. She said, Beckett, stop. I said, I'm not stopping, Marlena. I own this hotel. I own the building. I own the restaurant. I own the fa. I own the frop. I own the fraught. I own the company that owns the property. I bought it at auction 4 years ago and spent 2 years restoring it. The chandelier above your head I picked. The walnut on this table I sourced. The chef in the kitchen I hired. The sommelier you told me not to embarrass you in front of, his name is Robard, and I flew him in from California 3 years ago. My mother said, Beckett, this isn't funny. I said, I'm not joking, Mom. Grayson laughed. A nervous one. He said, Bro, come on. I turned to him. He said, Bro, come on. I turned to him. I said, Grayson, I know you told everyone you knew a guy. You didn't. You called the general line. You got in because Mrs. Pellman canceled her anniversary dinner 2 days ago. I have the email. Grayson's face did a thing. It went a little gray. Tyler, who hadn't spoken to me all night, leaned forward. He said, Beckett, you're serious right now. I said, I'm completely serious. My father set his wine glass down very, very carefully. He said, Son, how long? I said, 11 properties, Dad? 11. I started with 1. I have 11. Marlena said, That's impossible. I said, It's not impossible. You just never asked. She said, We did ask, Beckett. We asked all the time. And this is the part I want you to hear. Because she believed it. I think she actually believed it. I looked at her and I said, Marlena, the last time you called me on the phone for any reason other than asking me to send a birthday card to Mom was 3 years ago. You called me to ask if I could drive Tyler to the airport because his Uber canceled. You did not ask me how I was. You did not ask me what I was doing. You did not ask me a single question about my life. You never have. She opened her mouth. She closed it. My mother said, Beckett, honey, we've always been there for you. I said, Mom, 2 years ago you were in Nashville for Carly Donovan's wedding. You stayed at a vineyard 40 minutes from here. You did not call me. You did not text me. You did not let me know you were in town. I only found out from a Facebook photo. The year before that, you were here for Carly's bridal shower. Same thing. You didn't tell me. I called you the next week and you said, Oh, I forgot you lived up that way. My mother's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I said, You forgot. She said, Beckett. I said, Tonight you told me to wear something nice so I wouldn't embarrass Grayson's parents. You told me you'd pay my portion because I couldn't afford it. You told me not to order the wine. You told me not to bring up my job. You told me to sit quietly and smile. I looked around the table. I said, I'm going to do one of those things. I'm going to bring up my job. Grayson's father, who hadn't said a word, cleared his throat. He said, Frank, I think we should probably let your family have this conversation in private. My father said, No, Doug, please, stay. He turned to me. He said, Beckett, why didn't you tell us? This is the part where in a movie I'd give some big speech. I didn't. I just looked at him. I said, Dad, I told you when I was 16. You laughed. He closed his eyes. I said, I told you when I was 16. You laughed. He closed his eyes. I said, I told you when I was 19. Mom said I was still figuring things out. I told you when I was 24 and I got my first management job. You asked when I was going to settle down. I stopped telling you. Because every time I did, you made it small. So I made it big somewhere else where nobody was making it small. My mother started to cry. I watched her cry. I'm going to tell you the truth. I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel good either. I just felt clear. Like a window someone had finally washed. I stood up. I said, I want to be honest with you all. I came tonight thinking I'd just get through it. I told my staff to treat me like any other guest. I was going to eat my dinner, smile, and leave. But then Mom told me she'd pay my portion because I couldn't. And I realized something. I realized that for 34 years, I have been making myself smaller so that the rest of you could feel comfortable in a story you all agreed on. And I'm done. Marlena said, Beckett, I said, Marlena, I love you. I'm going to say that now, because I might not say it again for a while. But I want you to know something. The reason I didn't tell you about my life is because I knew. The second I did, you'd try to find a way to make it about you. You'd ask if I could get Grayson a job. You'd ask if Grayson's parents could stay for free. You'd ask if I could host your friend's wedding for cost. And I would say yes, because I'm me. And then 6 months later, you'd be back to telling me to wear a better suit. She started crying too. Tyler said, Beckett, come on, man. I turned to him. I said, Tyler, you haven't said hi to me tonight. You've been at the bar. You haven't asked me a single question about my life since we were teenagers. I love you. But we are not close. We have not been close in 20 years. Stop pretending we are when there's an audience. He looked at his lap. I said, I'm going to leave the dining room now. The dinner is paid for. It's on the house, tonight only. Grayson's parents, I apologize for the family business in front of you. The wine selection from here on out will be on the sommelier you didn't let me introduce. His name is Robard. He's very good. Grayson's father stood up. He extended his hand. He said, Son, I'd shake your hands on principle alone. I shook it. Then I walked out. In the hallway, Amani was waiting. She handed me a glass of water. She said, How do you feel? I said, Lighter than I felt in my entire life. She said, Anything else you need from me tonight? I said, Yeah, one thing. Cancel Grayson's father's wholesale account. Grayson's father, it turned out, had been one of our major auto vendors for the past year. Marlena had set it up without telling me. It had gone through middle management. Imani had flagged it once 3 months ago, and I'd let it slide because I had wanted to make a thing of it. I was done not making things of things. Imani said, Done by morning. I said, In the floor lease for Grayson's real estate firm. She blinked. She said, He has a floor lease. I said, In the Asheville commercial property. The one on Patton. He doesn't know I own it. Cancel the renewal. We'll honor the current term and then he's out. She said, Yes, sir. I went home that night to my actual home, a house I'd bought 2 years ago up in the mountains that nobody in my family had ever seen. I sat on the porch, I drank a beer, I listened to the wind in the trees. My phone rang 12 times that night. I didn't pick up. The next day, my mother left a voicemail. She said, Beckett, I'm so sorry. Please call me. My sister sent a text that said, Can we talk? My father, who I have never in my life seen send a text message, sent one that just said, I was wrong. I want to be honest with you about what happened after. I did not cut them off. I want to say that because I think the easy story is that I cut them off and walked away clean. I didn't. I'm not a movie. I'm a person. What I did was this. I waited a week. Then I called my dad. I told him I'd see him for lunch. Just him. I told my mother I needed time. I told my sister I needed more time than that. I told Tyler I'd see him when I felt like it. My dad and I had lunch at a diner. Not the Bernick. A diner. He cried. I didn't. He apologized. I let him. He apologized. I let him. He asked me to forgive him. I told him I'd be working on it. I told him that what I needed from him wasn't an apology. I told him what I needed was for him to ask me about my life. Just once. Just sit there and ask me what I did and listen to the answer. He asked. I talked for an hour. He listened. He cried twice more. It's been almost a year now since that night. My relationship with my mother is, I'd call it, distant. She's still angry at me underneath the apologies because I made her look small in front of Grayson's parents. I understand that. I don't carry it. My sister and I don't talk. She blames me for Grayson losing his lease. He had to move his firm into a smaller building. Their lifestyle adjusted. They're fine. They just had to give up the boat. Tyler sent me a long letter on actual paper 6 months after that night. He told me he'd thought about a lot of things. He told me he was sorry. He told me he wanted to do better. We're getting there. Slowly. We have a phone call every other Sunday. He asks questions. I answer them. He's getting better at it. My dad and I have lunch once a month. He drives up to Asheville. He sits in the lobby of the Bernick now sometimes, just reading a book. Just sitting there. The staff knows him. They call him Mr. B. He likes that. I let him have it. I want to leave you with this. Because I know there's somebody listening to this who's where I was. Sitting at a table, eating a meal someone offered to pay for because they think you can't. feeling something rot quietly in your chest. Here's what I want to say. You don't owe them the story you've been agreeing to. You don't owe them the version of you they invented when you were 8. You're allowed to be more than they decided. And you're allowed to let them find out. On a Tuesday, on a birthday, in a dining room you built with your own 2 hands. You don't have to be loud about it. You don't have to make a scene. You just have to stop making yourself small. And one more thing, the people who really love you, the ones who really see you, they ask. They ask how you are. They ask what you're working on. They ask if you ate today. They ask. The ones who never ask, they're not your family in any way that counts. They're just people you happen to share a last name with. I learned that at 34. I hope you learn it sooner. I'm Beckett. Thanks for listening. I've thought a lot about that night since it happened, about how a single dinner could undo 34 years of quiet bending. And the more I sit with it, the more I see that nothing that happened in that dining room was an accident. Every word my mother whispered to me, every laugh from Marlena, every joke from Grayson about my suit, every silence from Tyler at the bar, every handshake from my father instead of a hug, it was all the natural fruit of seeds planted decades earlier. You can't water dismissal for 30 years and then act surprised when the harvest is a son who stops showing up the way you expect. That's the part most people miss when they hear a story like mine. They think it's about revenge. It isn't. It's about the simple, unflinching rule that what you put into a person comes back. My family didn't lose me because I owned a hotel. They lost me because they spent 3 decades teaching me that my presence was tolerable but never necessary. The hotel was just the room where the bill came due. If I've learned anything worth passing on, it's this. Build yourself in the quiet. Don't perform for the people who never asked. When my father laughed at me at 16, I had 2 choices. I could shrink, or I could go somewhere else and grow where the light was better. I picked the second one, and not because I'm strong. I picked it because Mr. Halberd, a man who owed me nothing, took the time to see me when my own father wouldn't. That's the thing I want you to hear. The people who shape you aren't always the people who made you. Sometimes a stranger with a kind eye gives you more than a parent ever did, and the only honest thing to do with that gift is to live up to it. Strength, real strength, isn't loud. It's the kind that lets you sit at a table where your mother is offering to pay your bill, and instead of breaking the wine glass, you set it down and wait for the right moment to speak the truth. Trust me, the right moment always comes. Patience isn't weakness. Patience is the muscle that lets you act from clarity instead of rage. And character, the kind that matters, is built in the rooms nobody sees, in the night shifts at the Hampton Inn, in the bathrooms you scrub yourself before you can afford to hire someone, in the years when nobody is asking what you're working on, and you keep working anyway. That's where a man is made, not at the dinner where he reveals it. I forgave my father, slowly. I'm still working on my mother. I may never get back what I had with Marlena, and I've made peace with that, but I want to leave you with the one thing that took me too long to learn. Stop waiting for the people who refuse to see you to suddenly open their eyes. Go live anyway. Live so well that one day, if they ever do look up, they'll see something they didn't build, and they'll have to sit with what that means. That's not revenge. That's just what happens when a man finally stops asking permission to exist.